wait for a while,
I think
that's
we'll
fine.
wait for 5 minutes at least to
Sure.
get the
Sure.
few more people enter in.
And you're recording it as well? I think I see that
Yes.
recording thing. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Will that be okay?
Yeah. Fine with me.
Yeah. I think Ashu is the one who is in the background who is taking care of this.
Right.
Ashu, just to confirm, is the recording on? I don't know if you can unmute yourself or not sure if he's able to get the message from there. But I think it's on. I mean,
so there were a couple of pictures, images which I had shared. I don't know if he's able to share, but that's fine. If he's not, it was just to give people a context.
So Probal, Ashutosh mentioned that at the appropriate time of sharing, it's best that you be given the permission to share and you can share it from your end.
Okay. The thing is, I'm using my phone.
Okay. All right.
So we'll just see if it is possible. It should be possible through the phone.
Or why don't you mail it to me? I can be the.
You're on that email. You're on that email. So see if you can access it. You've copied on that email. Yeah. So you know Sagat and you know Sam. I know. I mean, you know of them. So yeah. So whenever.
Yeah, I know of them. Yes, I don't know them.
So do I. I mean, I've never met them. So yeah.
Vikram, how are you?
Good, sir. Doing good, sir.
Excellent. So,
right.
Just to let you all know, Vikram is one of the coaches in Andhra where I used to work together with him. Probably one of the sorted coaches, the way I would put it.
Right.
And very well respected there as well.
Hello, Vikram.
Hi, sir. How are you?
Very well. Very well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Right. I think some of those young boys are also joining in now.
Yeah.
And my message to them, obviously, first is that, we are starting off this Sports Life series after a bit of break. We had this webinar series going on through the lockdown. Like anyone else, we just thought of how to get engaged in a positive way.
Right.
And we were lucky enough to invite many of those cricketers, some of those coaches who were willing to come in and participate.
Right.
And the thing which came out nicely was that it was knocking the mind positively. The COVID challenge, I think it's still around.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere, but in probably in India, it's even more challenging. When I can relate to Bombay, for the players in Bombay, they are not even finding an access to go on the ground easily to practice.
Right.
But probably sometimes just all challenges becomes blessings in disguise, and we have these webinars when we think about it, and I'm obviously encouraging all of them constantly to bring in the skills of deep listening, because that's where you ensure that you retain all this information, knowledge which you're gaining.
Right.
And probably it creates a good habit, because the way to progress in any field, I think this deep listening is going to help you to retain that knowledge and probably process the knowledge in a best possible way in your own fields.
Right.
And hearing you out on the other day was, about that, the plan and the preparation and the process behind that is something which is exciting, so here we are with this probably phase 2 of Sports Life webinar series.
Great.
And we have Major Probal DasGupta over here, and I mean, for me to introduce him in a best possible way, I think I can only talk about my small experience of the talk with him a couple of days ago. His book, The Watershed 1967, is something which I'm looking forward to as well, and India's victory over China, some of those interesting things which probably as an Indian, who looks forward to some of these stories, to hear out, to read out. It's very exciting, and have you today over here. It's a privilege for us, Major Probal.
Thank you.
And if I can also request Shankar to do a little more fair introduction of Major, and thanks to you, Shankar, as well, to bring him on the platform here.
great. So thanks for the opportunity. So a couple of things. What I thought it'd be useful to touch upon is first talk a little about the conversation series, which I feel very excited about. And this is something that I've shared with you, Monty, and with Dinesh, and just for the benefit of others on the call today. So Sports Life, I believe, this concept of holding these conversations is very interesting, and it is actually quite an innovative concept. And having been part of the audience in some of the earlier conversations, I found it richly, it was very rich. The second thing is, the timing of it. It was done during the pandemic and during the dark days of the lockdown, as I call it, July, August, when, your movements were restricted and all that you heard every day was, there were so many new cases and the cases are spiking and there's so much of uncertainty around. So when you're locked down in your house, right, in your homes and confines of four walls, every week we look forward to this series because this was something new and this was something which I think filled all the attendance with hope, the audience. And I'm not saying it purely only from a sports standpoint, because first of all, you got to meet and interact with very different personalities who in their own way have contributed a lot to the sport and are doing a lot for the nation in their own way. They may not be from ICC test nations, but they may be from associate nations, but they're still doing a lot for their country. And that was a very interesting perspective. The second is, in spite of, they were also impacted by the COVID pandemic. But in spite of all this, I think they were keeping their hopes alive. They were training within the four walls. They were doing everything to remain in shape to be able to take off whenever situation permitted. So that was very interesting and very, I would imagine, inspiring hope. So I see this series as something that inspires hope, confidence, and kind of inspires people to do better. And it's just not about the aspiring athletes that we're talking about, but we're talking about coaches and we're talking about the other members of the audience who are only well-wishers of Sports Life or pursuing different careers in their life. I think the lessons were much, much broader in that sense. So I would just like to kind of endorse this series. I think it was really a great initiative on Sports Life's part. And thanks for the opportunity to introduce my friend Probal. So Probal and I have been together since college. So we grew up together. So, and then a few weeks back, I was talking to Monty about the conversation series and why somebody like Probal would be adding a significant amount of value to this audience. Is primarily because of 2-3 things. One, of course, Probal has served in the Indian Army. And as George Orwell famously said, sport is war minus the shooting. So, and that's something that has always stuck with me. And Probal and I always talk about the comparisons between sport and what he has experienced on the battlefield. Though his experiences are much, much more richer than what I can even imagine. So it made sense from that standpoint to invite Probal in. Second is, Probal is somebody who has always managed to reinvent himself. His first phase of his career was that of an army man. Then he went ahead and said that, no, I want to go back studying, and then reinvented himself in a corporate avatar. And while doing all this, he was an amazing sportsman. He played competitive soccer. He's a keen marathoner. So he is able to kind of hold, different perspectives and bring together a rich perspective from his own different sets of experience. He's managed to reinvent himself. That is something that I have always admired in Probal. And the third thing is obviously now this new avatar as a writer. So that has been interesting for many people who are in the middle of our careers. He stands as an example of somebody who can, broaden horizons and push the limits. And coming to speaking skills, he's somebody who knows pain. Okay, and we've exchanged notes on which parts of our body are really in good functioning shape. So the back isn't, the ankle isn't, the shoulder isn't. And Probal is somebody who's crossed the threshold of pain on a number of occasions. So he runs these half marathons and full marathons with a bad back, with a broken ankle, and he can push the barriers of pain, something which I thought a lot of sportsmen do. So I thought there were a lot of parallels between the experience that Probal brings to the table, both as somebody who served and in the armed forces and somebody who has also led different careers over the last 3 decades. So I thought it'd be very, very useful to have him on board. Probal, over to you. The screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Shankar. Thanks so much for the wonderful introduction. And in fact, I am at a loss for words in terms of describing myself. I think you've spoken more elaborately than I probably could think of. But yes, things have happened along the way. And for you to have recounted all these things, very kind of you, kind words. Thank you, Monty, for having me here speak this evening. It's a privilege and a delight to be here and speaking with an audience full of sportsmen who've been playing cricket at a great level, at a very competitive level. And I also think that, this is a session on a Sunday. I was just mentioning to Monty and Shankar a short while ago that, we are in the middle of IPL and to snatch people away from IPL and have here for the session. Thank you very much for taking your time out of watching cricket and being here for a session. So we hope to have a good, exciting session, interactive. Please feel free at the end to pitch in your views, your thoughts, ideas. And as I always say that, cross-functional learnings, I also learn from interacting with people, different disciplines and different avenues. So it's a great learning for me as well. And as Shankar said, he's recounted so many things, and I've learned a lot from my association with Shankar the last couple of decades or more than a couple of decades. And I think, what I have understood is the journey in life is filled with milestones of learning. And that's what I believe in. And here we are today at this session. So just before you begin,
just for the sake of the audience, so Probal and I were having a discussion. So he's going to be narrating tales, and during the course of certain tales that he narrates, he may use the army lingo without couching in words. So there may be a few expletives here and there, but it's not the expletive, but it is more to make the tale as rich and as real as possible. So that's a conversation that we had, and I said that should be fine because we got people who are.
I'm sure everyone will be excited about this whole journey right now. I like the last one what you said, Probal. And we keep on mentioning learner's journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are. And the people who are excited about listening to you will definitely listen to you in a deep way. Great,
thank you. So picking up from where Shankar left in terms of talking about the parallels, the way we approach things in the army, the way we approach actions, operations, very similar to sports. What brings us here today? So one of the things that I intend to talk about in the context of our conversation here today is the Indian Army. We're talking about cricket, we're talking about combat, but let me take a step back. And why the Indian Army? Again, when you look at the army that is there, that I come from, served in, it's the world's most diverse, unarguably the most diverse. It has all kinds of people from all religions, all regions, different places, different capabilities. So we're very diverse. An army which has operated in the deserts, in the mountains, in the jungles, in urban areas, and everywhere else. So one of the most diverse operational armies. Again, one of the toughest, has been active for the last 4 or 5 decades. I know very few armies that have been active for so long in such different terrain and different conditions. So the makeup of the army, the operations, the kind of experiences lend themselves to so many different varieties of learning, so many different things that we see. And it's not just 30, 40 years. If I were to go back to First World War, Second World War, fought in Iraq, fought in France, fought in Africa, everywhere. And thereafter, post-independence in areas around with the UN forces in Africa, in Sierra Leone, Angola, anywhere else, and here in India, at the line of control, at Siachen, in the Northeast. So I served in a few areas that when I did my tenure in the Army, I served for a decade. My first posting was at the line of control, a place that you would have heard of in a movie that was released recently called Uri. So Uri was my first place of posting. And when the movie was played, just to digress a little bit, the movie was played, I could see the land and I could figure out which was where, having spent some time at Uri, which led to the strikes and other things that happened thereafter. But so Uri was the first place that I served in. I served in Bhutan. I served in the Northeast part of the country. So, it was my luck, my fortune that I could see different kinds of terrain. There are others who've seen vast more than I have, served for 25, 30 or more years, have seen greater operational events, etc. But the learnings that I've had from the Army remain, and they have served me in good stead as I have gone along in different careers that I've pursued thereafter, after my first decade in the Army. Coming back to today's discussion, why did we think about this? I mean, I set the context in terms of where the Army comes from and, how many years, great, different diverse terrain, different kinds of people. This was one place where, battalion, you'll find three places of worship. You'll find a mandir, you'll find a masjid, and you'll find a church. And this is the only place where I've seen where, you have these balis, these sacrifices, and you have, we had a Muslim officer who was doing that. We've had General Atta Hasnan, who performs, the Navratri celebrations, with his troops. We've had the other way as well. So it's a great secular construct that we have, and that's the biggest strength that we have with the Indian Army. So why sports? So if you look at the parallels, you have an opponent, not just the Indian Army. Let's say the Army. Let's say the armed forces. You have an opponent. You have you have an objective, and you need to put in an effort to do something. And at the end, you have an outcome. And the outcome has a win or a loss, or even a draw. To keep the context particularly restricted to cricket, out of all sports, we also have a draw. So there are different kinds of outcomes. There are different kinds of results, and there are different kinds of terrain, pitches. You have 22 yards. In the Army, you have 50 yards, you have 100 yards, you have 500 yards, or, depending on the kind of weapon you're using and how far the opponent is. So there are different ways of comparing, of looking at things. The only difference is that, and that's an advantage that sports has, that cricket has, that when you have a loss, you have a chance, you have a second chance. In the Army, the losses could come back as body bags. So that's a difference that I want to start with. That being the difference, and it's not always that you do that. You can have a withdrawal and you can have an attack subsequently. But the larger metaphorical representation is that, look, go for an attack or go for an operation, chances are that there will be losses of men. Now, one of the things that we look at, and this is something that the Army presents, and this is, I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine, what is it that exhorts people? You have 100 men lined up at what we call as a forming up place before an attack. That group of 100, each one of them has the objective of taking the enemy and defeating the enemy. Now that is the objective. The instructions, the specific instructions have been conveyed to groups. But what I want you to imagine is think of the 100 men. Think of somebody exhorting that group of 100 men to climb to get to the objective, to defeat the enemy. Out of that 100 men, maybe 30 will come back alive, maybe 20. But I'm not asking you to think about that. What I'm asking you to think about is despite the odds, what motivates these 100 men to still go for the objective? What is it? It is not, and we'll come to all of this, come to fear, come to self-belief, confidence, training. We'll go through each of them briefly. But just at the start, when you start an operation, you're going into it, you know very well that at the end of it, only 30 people or 20 or maybe 10 or maybe more, maybe less would survive. You look left and you look right, you may not have them again after the battle is over. Yet, they are so motivated to go for it. So when you go back to take a step back and look at what is the kind of person that goes into the armed forces, and that there are three things out of all of which forms the personality of a soldier that I would talk about: commitment, capability, and courage. And we'll talk about all of this and why they are relevant to sports as well, why they're relevant to teams. What is commitment? What is courage? What is capability? Capability is measured. You can measure the capability. How can you measure commitment? How can you measure courage? What do you do about it? You spoke about my book, Shankar. The book starts with the action of a young man called Devi Prasad Limbu. Now, Devi Prasad Limbu, in the battle against China in 1967 at Chola, the battle had just started. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have an automatic weapon. He didn't have a rifle, but he had a kukri. Kukri is a dagger which is used by Gurkha soldiers in Nepal. So he had a kukri, and the Chinese had the automatics. They were better off in terms of the weapons at that point of time when the battle started. He swung his kukri, and the book starts with that, with the actions of Devi Prasad Limbu. He swung his kukri and he went through the Chinese defenses. He got 5 Chinese heads at the start of the battle. That set the momentum of the battle. What I'm trying to say is, to start a battle, if you relate it to sports, the aggression, the momentum, the charge, to wrest the psychological advantage away from an opponent is something that you can take a lesson from, a learning from. And that's something that why I started with this particular incident is because, like combat, sports is an area where youth is a very important factor. You have young men, young women playing the game, and they have the energy, the robustness, the momentum. The idea for all leaders, coaches, captains is to channelize that energy, to channelize that momentum, wrest the psychological advantage. And that is one of the major cornerstones of similarities between two disciplines such as combat and sports. One of the things that happens, and you see that in a combat, you read about outcomes. In sports, you read about outcomes. A spectator goes to the ground and sees the outcome. We all do that. But what is it that makes the outcome favorable, or makes the outcome ultimately happen in alignment with the aims that we have? How do we use the outcome, or how do we steer the process to the outcome that we desire? How do we have a favorable outcome? So, what happens is that in every sport, every operation as well, there are lots of uncertainties. There are knowns and there are unknowns. So what you see, what you read in newspapers that, oh, there was a terrorist hideout and it was surrounded, it was captured. Remember, there was a lot of preparation. There was a lot of structure, training, process that has gone behind it. What you see is the outcome. So when you look at process, when you look at structure, the armed forces are one of the oldest professions, and they have kind of refined the structure, refined the process to a degree that you can actually control what you have in your hand, and there's a lot more that is outside of it, and you have to be prepared for that. So how do you control what is in your hand? One of the things that it's essential to again speak about is laying out the battle order. When you go for operations, one of the things that you do at the start is to lay out your objective. And before you lay out the objective, you have to understand what is the information that you have about the enemy, the terrain, and yourself. So that's called cover. Cover is, where before you start an operation, you want to understand where the enemy is, how many of them are there, where are their light machine guns, where are their automatics, where are their forward defenses. Then you talk about terrain. Do we have to cross a couple of hills? Do we have to cross an obstacle, a nala on the way? How do we do it? Then you talk about ourselves, us. We have so many people. The enemy has so many people. So if the enemy has 100, do we have 300 people? You always need more people to attack and take out the defenses. That's a classical concept. I don't want to go into that. The idea here is to understand what are your strengths vis-a-vis the enemies, vis-a-vis the adversaries in this case. And that is something that comes with a very early stage of planning and understanding who you are, how you want to do it. If I were to just talk about concepts, it's going to be very boring. So let me give you a little story. In the book, so, in a battalion, in a unit, you have a commanding officer who's a colonel, then you have majors, you have captains, you have lieutenants, you have different ranks, and then you have the soldiers. But destiny is not so kind to you, never kind to us. So you'll never have the combination of all of this. You'll always be handicapped. एक leg spinner कम होगा आपके पास में, fast bowler नहीं है. You don't have the opening bowlers. You have to start with different kinds of people. What do? Colonel K.B. Joshi, who was commanding the Gurkhas at Chola, I spoke about Devi Prasad Limbu's action. So Colonel K.B. Joshi, when he took over command, he was left with 17 subalterns. When I mean subalterns, lieutenants. Now, lieutenant is a young 21, 22, 23-year-old. Not, so you didn't have the majors, you didn't have the lieutenant colonels, you didn't have the captains in the battalion at that point of time. But he had to make do with the people that he had, the officers that he had. How did he go about it? So it was known as the subaltern battalion. He went about by talking to people, by engaging with them in the language that they understand. They were youngsters. He was the only officer who was much older. So he went about understanding what they think. How do they want to plan? What do they want to do, etc. That is something that he wanted to understand. So when Chola happened, everybody, all the lieutenants in his battalion who were the ones who were involved in the Chola battle they knew what their actions were supposed to be, what their roles were supposed to be. In cricket, you would have a pinch hitter. You would have the pinch hitter, you would have to have that pinch hitter perform his role. He cannot start thinking he's somebody else. Maybe he can, depending on what instructions he's got. But the fact is, those instructions, those little communications have to be absolutely clear at the start. If Colonel K.B. Joshi had thought that, I think I have a battalion which has everything, then maybe he would have fallen short. But he knew that he had lieutenants, he had youngsters, so he wanted to use that energy. He wanted to use that energy, and he did, because he knew beforehand that this would happen. Some months before the battle, he had sent one of the Havildars, Tinjong Lama, for a course in recoilless guns to Mao. Now, recoilless guns is, it is an area weapon. So you have two kinds of weapon. You either have a rifle or a light machine gun, which are point weapons where you can fire and you can shoot a target. The larger weapons can destroy larger targets. They're called area weapons. So a recoilless gun, which could be, used by, lugging on the shoulder, or, in the mountains, you could do that, could destroy large bunkers. So he had sent one of the Havildars for a course to Mao 5-6 months back. Why did he do that? The battle hadn't happened. But that's exactly where your planning, your thinking ahead of time comes into play. If you're going to play a series somewhere else, and you know that those guys are going to prepare a particular kind of pitch or have a certain kind of ground, shorter grounds, you need to have people who can clear those boundaries, or larger grounds. You need to have men who clear those boundaries. Shorter grounds, do you want to pack your side with spinners? So the idea is to plan ahead. So he sent Tinjong Lama to Mao to train on a recoilless gun. It was not needed 5-6 months before that. I'll come to what Tinjong Lama's role was in the Battle of Chola and why that was useful as we go ahead. So, so this is the preparation. So when you prepare, you know your men, you need to understand. One of the things that, is said in the army, that you should know your men by the clothesline, by their chaddis, they say, if I may use the word. You must know your men by the underwears on the clothesline. That's what they say. Ye marksman hai, wo LMG wala hai, light machine gun wo chalata hai, by seeing the clothesline, by looking at that. It's a metaphor, but that's how, what the message is, that you must know who is good for what. Coming to, you can plan all your battles, you can do all of them in training. But what is it that you can do to prep that soldier in terms of responding at the time of battle? When bullets are flying, what do? You can train as much as you can, but you're not trained for live bullets to come at you. You can, and that's another difference that you have. In sports, you can go play the balls, at the nets. You can come close to reality, but in Forge, you don't have live bullets flying at you. But there are ways and means. What happens is that there is something called as, when you're in the academy, an officer undergoes training, there is something called as battle inoculation that he undergoes. What is a battle inoculation? A battle inoculation is a way of simulating battle conditions wherein you're crawling under trenches and the bullets are flying a couple of feet above your head. They may fly even higher, but they are seemingly to this cadets crawling in the trenches just a bit higher than where you are, to give you a sense of what it feels when bullets fly above your head. And those are things that simulate battle conditions, simulate how you're going to react when you're faced with real conditions. So how do you react when conditions change, when uncertainties happen, when something changes more, beyond what you have planned, what you've thought of? And that's where it's important to have a culture at the start. Uncertainties will happen. Uncertainties will always happen. How do you deal with uncertainties is creating a culture. Now, what's a culture? How do we create a culture in a team? Going back to combat and the regiments, the units, one of the things that happens is that each battalion, each regiment, if it's a Maratha regiment or it's a Madras Regiment, the Gurkha Regiment, Sikh Regiment. As I said, Indian Army has got several regiments. Each one of them has a battle cry, and it's not particular. It's not specific to Indian Army alone. There are battle cries for the British Army, for American armies as well. What does a battle cry do? Now, a Sikh battle cry, Bole So Nihal Sat Sri Akal, or a Gurkha battle cry, Jai Mahakali, Ayo Gurkhali. Now, I say this with a very banal tone. You can hear a bunch of Sikhs shouting the battle cry. It's stirring. What it does is creating a culture of self-belief, of winning. So when you have uncertainties, when you have obstacles on the way, you invoke the strengths that you have, the strengths that you possess by way of who you are. Whether it is Marathas, you invoke that strength, that battle cry. When I spoke about 100 men going into a battle. Now I come back to that question as to why they go in. They go in because they do not, I'll come to the aspect of fear, but they go in because they are representing their paltan. And they are deeply connected to the izzat, the honor of the paltan. So what that means is, when you're operating as a team, you operate, you have an honor to protect. You have an honor of your team that you carry. And that is the biggest thing that you can have there. I'll come to all these things, how all these things add up to finally face fear. We'll come to that at the end. But the honor of representing your team, the honor of representing a unit is one of the biggest elements, or one of the biggest things that an officer or a soldier can achieve when he is operating with his unit. I'll give you an example. A unit, an infantry unit is a fighting unit. The army has several fighting arms, support arms. Infantry is one of them. Or any other unit, you say, if an infantry unit were to operate in field, I have seen officers who are posted in peace would say, we don't want to function in peace anymore. We'll go and join the unit in field. The reason why they do so, they can have their comfort in the peace station that they're posted, but they leave that and they would join the unit in the field. The reason they would do that is because they feel that if my men are in the field, operating and serving in those areas, why would I be sitting in peace somewhere else? What I'm talking about, what I'm referring to is the camaraderie, the battle cry, the camaraderie, the egalitarianism that prevails in a battlefield. If I remember when, in Gurkhas, what happens is, when you go and join the battalion, you spend some time with the Jawans, the soldiers in the barracks. You speak their language. People ask me, how do you speak fluent Nepali, fluent Gurkhali? My answer is, well, not just me. Gurkha officers who serve there know it. It's only when I came out, I realized that, is it something different? Is it something surprising? Because people said, oh, you can speak this. I said, I thought that was normal. When you're with your men, you should be speaking the language that they speak. And the reason, my father served with 18 Madras, and he fought the 1965 war as well. He was for a brief period with the Indian forces in Pakistan, having captured parts of Sialkot, close to Lahore. So he used to serve. He was part of the. He was in the Madras regiment, but he served for a time with the Sikhs, and he quickly learned that with the Sikhs, you have to speak their language. He asked the Sikhs one time. The Sikhs, they told him that, look, oh Saab, ठीक नहीं था. So my father asked him why. Oh, साहब नु गाली देनी नहीं आती. पैंच और नहीं बोलता. So that is a Sikh way. You have to preface it. It's like, hello. That's the operating word. But you can't do that with the Gurkhas. So you have to know what happens, where it works. It's horses for courses. But if you're with your men, your soldiers, you have to understand what works together. Not works for them, but works together. You and them. It's always together. So that's what propels you forward. Soldiers come with their own understanding of operations, what would they do, etc. And it's important to understand where they operate from. Just to give you a sense, every Sikhs, I spoke about Sikhs. One of the cases that happened in Sri Lanka, one of the times the Sikhs can be, they're full of Josh. They come with a lot of Josh. You have to channelize that Josh, or they're one of the fiercest warriors. Once they found, we all know about Prabhakaran. He was the LTTE chief. So they found Prabhakaran's jeep somewhere. The army found his jeep, and the army, the Sikh, it was a Sikh unit. So the Sikh officer was calling, on the radio to figure out if, they could get a bomb disposal squad, if, to check if there was anything inside. By the time he connected on the radio, the Sikh soldiers had ripped open the jeep and pulled out all the seat, and saab yahan to kuch hai nahi. So they're very robust. They would go about doing what they do, and over a period of time, you are able to then understand what works best for a team, whether it's Gurkhas, whether it's Sikhs, etc. One of the things that happens, and I'm talking about the culture that happens, that is important to be established in the team, is to reiterate stories from the past. My battalion, the 5th Battalion of 11 Gurkha Rifles, captured the town of Bogra in 1971. I've heard so many stories. It's important. It's important because, when you're faced with uncertainties, when you're faced with plan A not working, you need to go back to what worked for us all this while. It's important to stress on the positives. It's important to document them. It's important to keep talking that, look, last year we played this, and this is what happened. We came back from the dead. We did this. It's important to reiterate. It's not okay to just talk about it and forget, because we look forward. We need to look at our glories. You need to look at the stories. It's important to preserve them. The army does that in terms of battles, in terms of, and they award. Say, for instance, there's something called as battle honor. Now, what's a battle honor? Battle honor is where you have won the honors by capturing that place or defeating the enemy. It's an honor given to the battalion. There are battalions which are known by the places that they captured. The Zojila battalion captured Zojila. The Bogra battalion, my battalion is called the Bogra battalion. So these things, these messages, these symbolisms help in reiterating, reinforcing who you are. And it also helps in times, as I said, it's a journey. Sportsmen, army men, all of us in life have journeys, and those journeys will have their ups and downs. It is during the downs that our character, our toughness will be tested. And that is when we need to really fall back on the glories, on the stories that you believe in, which will push you forward and keep you afloat. I thought, it'd be good to talk about how we operate, how things operate. We talked about courage. I briefly mentioned courage. Now, to talk a little more about why I speak about courage, because, do we need courage in sports? Of course. Do we need courage in combat? Yes. What is courage? Let's put it in this 80-20 framework. A lot of it is physical courage, and then comes mental courage. So when I talk about physical courage, what does that mean? Think of it. I spoke about how tests at the start happen to when people are tested at the interview stage, and officers go, it's called the services selection board. You tested what people see, what the selectors at that point of time when the selection is done of officers for the academies, see the commitment, see the courage, see the capability. Not so much the capability at the start, because you have to see, you undergo training. One of the important things that they see is the physical courage, the commitment. So you go up you go up a tree and there's a rope hanging a few feet away from you. You're not trained for it. But what they see is whether you can jump. The rope you will catch. But to you, when you go up, it seems that you may not be able to catch and you might fall down, and there's a sand pit there. So there are a few other exercises one is made to do at the start when you have the interview. It's an exhaustive interview of a few days. And they test you in psychometric skills and everything. But the fact is, the underpinning fact is they see the kind of raw, organic courage that you possess and the commitment that you have. What is physical courage? So when you go, the army is one place. And this is something that I distinguish the army from the corporate. The army is one place where you put yourself under physical risk. Put yourself at physical risk, at physical danger when facing the adversary. Like, for instance, if there's a fire at some corporate factory, one wouldn't be going there to face up to that physical risk. But in the army, you're actually putting yourself in line physical danger, because you're leading your troops. You're leading your troops in battle. Similar is the case with sports, where you're leading your troops, and the ball could be coming at 95 miles an hour or 90 miles an hour, or you're playing in a pitch that is not very conducive to batting, or some other thing that puts the grave physical danger before you. So the physical courage is something that is, again, you go back to training, you go back to creating that physical ability, through training. If I were to, I sometimes do run marathons and half marathons. If I were to run a 21K half marathon, I would run 25K in practice to be able to actually run 21K, because on the day of the run, the weather would be warmer, could be warmer. There could be other conditions because of which by 18 or 19 kilometers or 17 kilometers, I would be tired. So physical courage, if I were to veer away and take it to the armed forces context, is where you train to the extent you're able to take on possibilities of facing danger. You simulate battle conditions, and it's a combination of several things. You create a culture. I spoke about a culture. You create culture. You create the culture of winning, the culture of representing your team, the honor. And that's where, when you're leading your team, you're setting the example, leading from the front, you're showing the physical courage. That is where you set an example. And that example is something that comes from training beyond what is needed when you have to actually face the event, the adversary. When you're running a full marathon, there's a phrase called hitting the wall. You hit the wall when you're tired and you can't run anymore. But that wall, the full marathon is 42 kilometers. You can hit the wall at 32. You can hit the wall at 36. But if you haven't trained enough and you hit the wall early, then you have a lot more to travel. So your physical ability is equal to your physical courage. The physical ability has to be greater than expected so that you are able to put yourself in line for the uncertainties that you face. One of the things that happens, and physical courage is something that, where you constantly are pushing yourself. You're leading your men, you're being with your men, and you're creating a culture where the main thought is about completing the objective. When somebody leads an operation, the thought is not of losing one's life. The thought is, as an officer, the thought is, can I lead it right? At the end of it, will I be considered worth leading this operation? Will people remember me for this? Will I be able to do what I set out to do? So when you're focused on the job, that is where you are able to overcome fear to the extent that you're able to. Physical courage is something that is again associated with the way you approach the objective. When I spoke about 80-20, the mental courage part is the 20 part. Now, I spoke the other day about how we were in an operations and we had to the enemy, we were operating in somewhere in the Northeast. So the militants hadn't showed up in a long time, but we had to lie in the grass for a long time, 72 hours. We were waiting for them outside the village. If we hadn't trained for that time, we would have not been able to wait, be patient, be resilient for the militant to show up. And when they finally did, we needed to have the kind of energy, the kind of resilience, the kind of patience, and the kind of ability to focus, to concentrate, that after some time, after a long time, when actually the action happens, we are ready to confront it. That's something that is important to consider when you're looking at the mental resilience, the mental strength. When I spoke about a full marathon, you need to push your physical ability to the extent that you can cover most of that 42 kilometers so that your mental strength required of you is lesser. But at the same time, you need to train yourself physically to the extent that you're able to then mentally focus at the time when needed. And that's the 20% that I would think is important to attain the victory or the objective at the end. One of the things that I remember is, and this is for leaders, this is for coaches, is a dilemma. You have two options when you take a decision. Which option should you exercise? One of the examples that I have in the book is of General Sagat Singh. General Sagat Singh, a couple of examples I would, one is General Sagat and one is General Sam Manekshaw. General Sagat, when he was in the Battle of Nathula, and this is something, I just give you a brief example, brief description that, in the Battle of Nathula, the Chinese had really taken the advantage at the start and overpowered. And, they had brought on all the fire at their command and the Indian posts were really bombarded. The one option General Sagat had was to use the artillery. Now, artillery is again an area weapon. It would go above the crest of the hills and would destroy the Chinese defenses. If only General Sagat could use it. But he was not supposed to use it. Why? Because you could use the artillery only when the Prime Minister's office could permit you to do that. So General Sagat sent a message to the Prime Minister's office from Sikkim, from the India-China border at Sikkim, at Nathula. The Chinese were actually bombarding the Indians, taking advantage. Indian troops were under pressure. And what did General Sagat do? General Sagat had a choice. That's called the dilemma, the leadership dilemma. He had a choice whether to go by protocol and wait for the permission to come from Delhi or to use the artillery himself. He opted for the latter. He used the artillery on the Chinese and decimated the Chinese. And that turned a kind of a setback that India was facing. From there, it turned into victory. To take the right call at the right time, the right resources, that is something extremely important. And that is something that, one learns with time, one learns with um, facing situations. But at the same time, as a leader, it's important to see what is your higher calling. Once you identify the higher calling, you're able to take a call which will give you the right results. If General Sagat had waited for the protocol, he would have lost. He did not. He decided to use the artillery. The other thing I remember, the other story was of General Sam Manekshaw. Many of us wouldn't have heard of General Sagat, but I think some of us would have heard of General Sam Manekshaw, who was the field marshal, the army chief during the 1971 India-Pakistan war. Now, Bangladesh, then East Pakistan, is a country which has got lots of rivers. It's a riverine delta and several other water bodies. So when India decided to attack, when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi decided to, launch an attack into Bangladesh, it was just before the monsoons. So when he asked the cabinet, everybody said, yes, madam, attack kar dete hain. But it was General Sam Manekshaw who said, no, we can't go now. He was faced with a lot of ridicule. Everybody thought that the general was timid. The general was scared because they did not know what he was planning. And that's where I would like to go into the whole aspect, go back to the aspect of self-belief, of understanding, of having faith in your plans. The reason why General Sam Manekshaw chose to not go during monsoons was because Bangladesh, as we read in newspapers and know about, when it rains in Bangladesh, it really pours. It gets flooded. Everything gets flooded. Rivers, you can't see the other side of the bank. The armies, the Indian army, couldn't have moved because of the overflooding of the rivers during the monsoons. So General Sam Manekshaw had asked for the attack to be postponed to November, December, when the monsoons would be over. But not many people understood it. But he withstood. He withstood all of that. He believed in the decision that he had taken. He waited for time. He was patient, resilient. And when the time arrived, he launched his forces. Within 2 weeks, the war was over. India had marched into Bangladesh and Pakistan had been defeated. So that example is not about the war, but about the leadership decision that General Sam Manekshaw had to make. He had to take a call. If he had gone along with everybody and been a yes man, he wouldn't have, the history that happened would have been quite different. But Sam Manekshaw believed in speaking the truth. And I think, to the Prime Minister's credit, she also took his advice. So it's important to be patient, to have an open communication, to have a kind of culture where you're able to take that feedback and use that to take a decision which is based on rational inputs, on thinking, and on the inputs provided by people who you think have had the right kind of information. So those things are absolutely crucial. One of the things that you do very similar sports and combat is practice. A lot of things that happen on ground, and we spoke about this in other in the session earlier, is practice. I spoke about Tinjong Lama using the RCL. When he went to Mao, we spoke about the Chola battle where he used the RCL. What happened, I spoke about how he was sent to Mao. He was trained in Mao. And 5-6 months back, Colonel Joshi had sent him to Mao to train in that automatic weapon 5-6 months before the Chola battle happened. So when he came back to Chola, and the battle took place. Again, the difference that the battle, the differentiator in that battle, the difference in that battle was the RCL that Tinjong Lama used. He blew away the Chinese bunkers. But behind that action of Tinjong Lama, which changed the Battle of Chola in India's favor against China, was the fact that when in Mao, he was using that weapon in practice. I spoke with Tinjong Lama and he said, the instructor told me that, you're not very good in theory. You don't seem to be answering all those questions on paper, but you're damn good with the weapon. Interesting that, he had to use the weapon on ground, which he did. He was not very good in theory about the gun. But the fact is, at the end of the day, you got to use what you have. And that's where, using a weapon and using your equipment, using your skills is extremely important. There are times that, it happens when you're preparing for an operation, you're not in the best of form, you're not in the best of moods. But you, as a person, what happens in the army is everybody is so closely knit. You have a buddy system. The buddy knows if his buddy is, if his other if his buddy, the person knows that his buddy is not well or is not performing well. So there is that buddy system, and the internet team system enables you to perform as a part of the team. If somebody is not up to the mark, then there are others who compensate, who overcompensate. And that results in the overall team not dropping the performance. And I've seen this many times where people have to, there are uncertainties too many, where you have operations going on for many days, somebody's not well, somebody's not really being able to go along with the troops. But the teamwork, the camaraderie is so great that brings everybody along. And that's something that is really remarkable, which I have seen happen in the armed forces. At the end of the day, it's about regular people having extraordinary belief in what they can do and the extraordinary capacity to achieve something way beyond one station. And I go back to that whole idea of, reinforcing what you have. And it's a combination of your mental, your physical, and your, the strengths that you bring together as a part of the team. One of the things that happens in practice is to see what is going to happen. And I spoke about General Sam Manekshaw's foresight, the ability to convey that to his boss. I'm reminded of one more incident, and this is something that happened related to 9/11 that we all know about. The head of security, Rick Rescorla of Morgan Stanley, in 1993, he fought in Vietnam and again US Army, very decorated war veteran. 1993, a bomb went off in the basement of WTC. Now, when the bomb went off, it didn't hurt too many people, but the evacuation took place from WTC, and it took a long time, which actually hurt Rick more than anyone else. Everybody thought, what, the bomb went off, we are lucky. Man, we are lucky, it's fine. Yeah, oh, good. But Rick thought, no, we didn't do a good job. We should have been better in terms of evacuating. What if the bomb went off again? What if something happened? So Rick put together a plan. And he put together a plan where Morgan Stanley employees would actually evacuate every time he would put a drill together. So he put a drill session by session, every now and then, almost every month they would do that. 8 to 10 times a year, they would do this drill of evacuating from the South Tower of WTC for a few years. New employees, old employees, everyone of Morgan Stanley. There were 2,700 odd employees. When the plane struck on 9/11, everybody was shocked and surprised. But there was only one set of employees that were ready that day, the Morgan Stanley employees and Rick Rescorla. That day, due to Rick Rescorla's drills and practices, 2,700 lives of Morgan Stanley were saved. Barring 13, everybody who worked with Morgan Stanley at WTC was saved that day. Rick, unfortunately, died because he was saving the others after he had rescued a whole lot of people of his company. So, practice, training, it comes, and as I said, Rick was a veteran. He served in Vietnam, and he believed that if this had happened once and people hadn't shaped up, people hadn't really done the drill well, he needed to do better. So those are things that help you create self-belief. Why I say that is when the plane struck, people knew what to do, and that was practice. Self-belief comes from doing that thing over and over and over again. So that is, what if your plans don't come off? What if it takes longer for a wicket to fall? What do you do? Do you change things? Do you change the way you need to do the things that you've been doing? Look at General Sam Manekshaw's actions. Look at Rick Rescorla's actions. They had self-belief. They knew the plans were ready. If something were to happen, what would they do? They had their plans ready. They had the self-belief. They had the practices, and they had the people who would go along with their plans. So some of these things are very important. And as I think about the actions, there are moments. In sports, you want to go in and you have 30 runs of 7 overs and 4 wickets in left, and you play an ugly hike and you're out. Suddenly you are 3 wickets left, or 2 wickets if you've lost 2 more, lost another one. So it's 2 wickets, and suddenly you are up in the down the tail. You're looking at the tail and you're not sure anymore as you were. So that can happen. Overconfidence can bite you. The army has a structured way of approaching, where your drills, the way you approach. I spoke about khabar, I spoke about mounting the attack, I spoke about each man being designated a role. All those things come into play. But there are occasions when things don't go your way. At the Battle of Nathula again, Captain P.S. Dagar and Major Harbhajan Singh and his troops, when the Chinese had suddenly opened up and killed a lot of our soldiers, these people, these 2 officers with a bunch of other men, actually mounted an attack on the Chinese up the hill. They were mowed down. They lost their lives. It was one of those moments when they wanted to take on the Chinese. Courage, great courage, but they lost their lives. What happened was that, the Chinese kept firing. Some of the Indian troops at that point of time. It's not that, you have your soldiers, so nobody's going to, nobody fears anything. You actually have fear right before you. How you overcome fear is what is important. Sam Manekshaw once said that, the only person, so he said, if you have to put his exact words, use his exact words, he said, if you are saying that you don't fear anything, you're either lying or you're a Gurkha. I'll give you an anecdote. It's a funny anecdote. A platoon of Gurkhas, and Gurkhas are known for their courage. A platoon of Gurkhas was on a flight and taken by a para-commando officer for para-jumps. So when they were on a flight, the para-commando officer asked the Gurkha soldiers, okay, अभी हम लोग इधर ऊपर आ गए हैं, कितने आदमी तैयार है जंप करने के लिए? out of the 30 in that platoon of Gurkhas, only 7 hands went up. Mind you, these are brave Gurkhas, courageous Gurkhas, only 7 hands out of 30. The para-commando officer looked at the Gurkha officer. He said, boss, you said these guys would jump, and I've heard a lot about these guys. What happened? What happened to your boys? They lost their courage, or have I overrated them? She said, रुक जाओ, मैं पूछता हूँ. Let me ask. He asked in Gurkhali, कति मान्छेले जम्प गर्नु चाहिन्छ parachute को साथ संगमा? All 30 hands went up. The only difference was, he said, if I will translate it to Hindi, कितने लोग जंप करने के लिए तैयार हैं parachute के साथ में? So you can imagine, those 7 hands actually went up thinking that they would have to jump without a parachute. So with Gurkhas, as I said earlier, with certain troops, you have to be very specific. What do you want them to do? They follow orders. So the orders for them was jump out of the plane. The officer hadn't talked about the parachute. The Gurkha officer corrected it. He said, how many of you want to jump with the parachute? 7 people initially. Without the parachute, they said we'll jump. But when the parachute was mentioned, all 30 wanted to jump. So General Sam said, if you say you're not lying, if you don't have courage, you're either lying or you're a Gurkha. Now that is something that is evocative of what Gurkhas stand for in terms of courage. Either Gurkhas or Gauls. So rest everybody has fear to contend with. We all are mortals. We have fear to contend with. Devi Prasad Limbu overcame that. He went with his kukri and he bludgeoned the Chinese. So when you're looking at fear, when you're looking at fear in the face, you look at leaders, when combat leaders take their troops into battle, there is a certain thing called muscle memory. When you train with your weapons, when you look at the fog of war unfolding before you, confusion, bullets flying everywhere, all you look at is how do I get there? It's actually very little that you think of, except for the objective. And that comes by way of focusing on what you want to achieve. The battle cry, the fog of war, leading your men to the objective, following your plans, all of them come together. And all of them come together, including your culture that you've created in the team, to conquer fear. Fear is something that stands before you. You need to understand what is it that you fear. Define it, and then you will see that how less that you think the fear is before you. I mean, when the more you think of fear, the more you think about how big the mountain is, the more daunting it becomes. When you go up a mountain, you look at it in terms of few milestones that you need to attain. And that's how, when you operate in the army, you look at milestones. You look at capture of a bunker, bunker to bunker, to bunker to bunker. You look at milestones. And when you look at milestones, when you look at camaraderie, look at the strengths that you possess as a team, you creating your ability to conquer fear. Muscle memory of using your tools, your weapons, your skills is something that stands you in good stead. These are strengths in your balance sheet. These are strengths that you have, and these are strengths that you need to constantly remind yourself. And imagine, one of the things that we do is imagine. Imagine how you want to go ahead. Imagine how you want to take that objective. Imagine how you want to exhort your troops. As a company commander or as a leader of troops, one needs to imagine. As a coach, as a captain, you have to imagine. As a batsman, you have to imagine for yourself. Till you imagine that this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to go about it. Otherwise, you are not really figuring out how you want to go ahead. Imagining the journey ahead helps you to focus your strengths your objectives in terms of attaining the goals that you set out for yourself. One of the things, I mean, I just quickly end, we have been going on for a long time, is, we spoke about the fog of war. There is, one thing that we always speak about is cross-functional learning, which we started with. Now, cross-functional learning, today we have gadgets, we have TV, we have Instagram, we have social media, all of that. But what I have realized over a period of time is all great leaders, whether they are of military, corporate, sports leaders, they all have relied on the past, on the stories, on people. So, there are a few things that are important. People are one of them. Books are one of them. Stories are one of them. And I spoke about how you create a culture in the team. Stories about your team, stories about other teams, stories about people. Those are important. Understanding how it works in another field. What works in football? What works in soccer? How does the coach do? Try watching a football match. Try watching some other sport. See the cross-functional learnings and see how they happen. I, as an army man, I would think that, oh, what happens in the Air Force? What happens in some other arm? What happens in the artillery? If as an infantryman, I would think like that. What happens elsewhere? The stories, the anecdotes, they always help you understand the various situations much better. Also, what it does is create idols. How? I spoke about General Sagat. I spoke about his leadership. I spoke about his leadership dilemma. I spoke about him choosing one over the other because he thought that was his higher calling. Now that is embedded inside my head. Even though I'm outside the army, I don't serve there anymore. But these are learnings. These are learnings. These are idols. These are people who set examples. The more you read about them, the more you have people who you look up to. When you bat, do you want to bat like Sehwag? Do you want to bat like somebody else? You need to know more about the personalities, about the people. And then those are the people, those are the personalities, those are the skill sets that you try and imbibe. I'm not saying that you should be anybody other than your own man, but there is a great deal that is out there to be learned from. And that's something that, I've always believed happens. I was talking to General Sagat. General Sagat is one of India's greatest military leaders. I spoke about him briefly. I don't know if that's something that I hope I'm been able to convey. So General Sagat I spoke with his granddaughter some time back, and she said that, he was a voracious reader. He was a voracious reader. He used to read all the time. Then I asked her a little more. One of the things I learned from her about General Sagat and about some of the other leaders is that, or successful military men, is that they have a structured approach to certain things in life. So like General Sagat would believe that, if you structure your day 60 to 70% or 80% of the day, then it leaves you with the rest of the day to be creative about your profession, about the skills that you want to think about. I spoke about imagining. Create time to imagine. If you you want to run in the morning for this much time, you want to bat for this much time and play for this much time, it creates a structure. It creates a structure that enables your body, your body muscles, your mindset to sort of behave in the manner that your routine has been set. It also enables your mind to be free to access other creative zones and imagine and think beyond what you're doing. And that's something that leaders set. They have their structures. It works for them. It may or may not work for you, but it's also it's a good thing to see how what has made people tick. And one of the things that I see is their approach to anything. The knowns that they have in life are separated from the unknowns. And when you know that this is what I want to do every day, which doesn't change, I have to practice for these many hours. I have to, if I have to practice my off drives, I have to practice my off drives. these many hours, these many balls. Those are knowns. That helps you tackle the unknowns. I used to, I remember when we used to be in the ranges, we used to keep firing for hours together. Those hours were boring, but then that also helps you create self-belief that this is what I can do. There was a Chachro raid in 1971, one of the greatest raids that happened, where Bhavani Singh, who was later the Maharaja of Jaipur, he and his forces went 200 kilometers inside Pakistan and captured posts and dismantled their entire communication lines, which led to a victory in the deserts. They went in their jeeps and they went 200 kilometers inside Pakistan. You think that was again the outcome. The outcome, it's spoken about as the Chachro raid. It's one of the greatest raids that happened after the SAS raid, the British SAS raid against the Germans in the World War. The Chachro raid, led by General and Brigadier and later Maharaja Bhavani Singh, was an outcome of 5 months of rehearsals and practices, etc. And that was one of the surgical strikes, a real surgical strike, which had happened at that point of time. 5 months of continued practice. I've known people, I've known my service colleagues who were practicing for months together to do some certain raids in Kashmir across the line of control. Didn't happen, but they were rehearsing for months together. And when you rehearse at a level higher than what you might face. And that enables you to create that self-belief, to have a plan A and a plan B because of training at those levels. I think I've spoken enough. Lastly, the one thing that I would say is that you play a game. A soldier, is in a profession of arms. He's in a profession of arms because he loves it. So love the game. Enjoy. That's the most important part of it. There are losses, there are wins, but there's a journey to enjoy. Have fun. We spoke about training, we spoke about several other things. Not all the times do you meet with success. Not all the times do you meet with wins and things that you train or think about come off. Not always will all of that would happen. But think about things that you enjoy doing. And those are the things that you really would treasure at the end of the day. How to deal with losses, how to deal with several aspects that you have in your journey. There was an incident, I would end with this. When I was training, when I was in the valley, one of the soldiers there was a lot of fire from the Pakistani side, for instance, at that place near Kashmir, in Kashmir, at the line of control. And one of the soldiers, who I had asked to go along with the other soldiers to clear the fire because the mines had been set on fire, had lost his leg. I felt very bad about it because I had asked him to go with the others. Some years later, when we were back in a peace location, I asked where the soldier was, and he was very happy. He had a prosthetic leg. He was back in the battalion. He was serving, and though he had suffered a loss, there was the kind of the kind of commitment, the kind of joy that I saw on his face. He was back, and he was back as a soldier, which is what he wanted to do. So enjoy what you do, and at the end of the day, I spoke about opponents. I spoke about adversaries. One of the things I want to emphasize is that play and enjoy your game with dignity. In the Kargil war, and this is happening between adversaries on opposite sides. There was a captain from the Pakistani army called Captain Sher Khan. He was, on Tiger Hill, and he was actually stopping all the Indian attacks for a long time. It was very difficult to overcome Tiger Hill. Finally, the Indian forces did overcome Tiger Hill. But the Indian Brigadier Bajwa was all praise for the way the adversary, Captain Colonel Sher Khan of Pakistan, had put up the defense. So he wrote a small piece of, uh, you know, uh, testimony on a piece of paper he wrote, and he put it in the pocket of Captain Colonel Sher Khan. Colonel Sher Khan's body was taken to Pakistan, and based on the note of the opposition brigadier, of the enemy brigadier, Brigadier Bajwa, he was awarded the Nishan-e-Haidar, the highest award in Pakistan based on the testimony of an enemy. What did Brigadier Bajwa write? That he fought very well for his country and he should be rewarded. He fought like a brave, true soldier. So at the end of the day, if soldiers on the opposite sides can have dignity for each other in terms of the abilities that they have, I think as sportsmen, that's something that we should enjoy having at the end of our matches and at the end of every encounter that we have. As Shankar said, sports is war minus shooting. Well, war has shooting, but at the end of the day, you still have two people who are sportsmanlike. I would end here. I've spoken for a long time, and I think I hope I've made some sense, but be open to any questions that you have.
Appreciate, Major. I think you covered many bases through this whole talk, and I must say that the temperament which you brought in probably is the temperament which you, an opening batsman, needs to carry the innings through, and you carried the innings very well.
Thank you.
I would be actually encouraged through this whole talk, if people can make sure that they can open up and ask questions. We have some young leaders, we have few good coaches here who can open up and bring in one of the elements which they can relate to. I could relate to so many of the stories which you explained. And
Right.
then, you talk about, for example, if I have to open up first one out in this whole conversation while listening to you, I could go back to a great example which you talked about, looking into the history, looking into the stories, and then relate to that. Probably also look into your own experiences from the past, which then helps you to plan and prepare better for the next assignment which you get in. And that was very interesting for me.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll pick one or two guys who are listening here. I mean, Vedant is one of those young opening batsmen. I can read his name right here. If he wants to switch on unmute himself and put it across, then we have Krish, who is an all-rounder. So yeah, go ahead, Krish. Have you unmuted him, Ashu?
Hello.
Yeah. Okay, Vedant, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first. Sir,
Right.
I mean, it was a great session overall. I enjoyed listening to you. I mean, couple of things to relate to. You describe, your journeys very well about everything you've gone through and about all those marathons and your Kaggle journeys and whatever more things. So personally, for me, I mean, no questions as such, but I'm actually a little bit scared when I go to open the innings. It's kind of a repetitive question, but I'll again ask it. I mean, different perspectives from different personalities, and so I'm a little bit not apprehensive as such, but I'm a little bit scared when I go to open. So is there anything I could inculcate to take out the nervousness out of me and execute my plans very well whenever I go out to bat?
Yeah. Thanks. I couldn't get your name. I'm sorry.
I'm Vedant, sir.
Hi, Vedant. Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much. Vedant, different people have different ways of dealing with. Do you still have a question, or should I answer?
No, you can answer right now.
Okay. So different people have different ways of dealing with, concerns, fears, lack of, I would say initial doubts of dealing with their own things. If you were to ask me, every time I speak somewhere or read out something or do something, there's also that little uncertainty that is there. It's a good thing, actually. if you were to look at a little bit of uncertainty, if you were to look at something that you're not sure of, it's not unusual. It's not unusual. Everyone who goes into an operation or goes into a different activity, there are uncertainties and there are challenges. The way I would look at it is, you have opened earlier, you have opened and scored runs. Think about the runs that you've scored. Think about opening again and again. Sometimes what tends to happen, and this is something that I believe in, and I said that to each one has a way of tackling that. And I would think the finding your own way is important. At the same time, taking something head on is what I think works for me. In terms of the armed forces, well, as I said, when you lead your men, you look at the objective, you look at things, you look at the strengths, you rely on the strengths that you have, and those strengths come from practice. Those strengths come from the two parts to fear: the physical and the mental. The physical fear you overcome by constant practice. The mental fear is match practice in the armed forces, the actual operations. Sorry, and that's where the greater the greater you practice, the greater is the certainty that you invest yourself with, the greater self-belief. The more you simulate a match condition, the better the chances of overcoming any fear that you would have. And that's the second part. The third part is go out there and be who you are. I think that's the one thing that I've seen happen with a lot of people, taking decisions in the armed forces and otherwise as well.
Major, I would like to jump into this. You simulate the word which you use. It's a fantastic one to put it across to the players. I think we talk a lot about visualization. And many a times, like just Vedant's question about, fear, like the opening batsman, you said, but the visualization of the right kind of opponents. And I think the other thing which you mentioned about through the stories was how someone was able to imagine the kind of challenge which he'll get in and to prepare 5 months early of that, So the other thing which you talked about, how many more times you can be in that same situation by practicing through. I think that's a great way of putting it across. That would be the thing, Vedi, you need to keep on. I think the opportunity which you get, Vedi, from listening to different personalities, reinforcing the same kind of an information, but in different ways. I hope you get it.
Yes, sir.
Krish, you want to go ahead?
Sorry.
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
I would firstly like to thank you for your services to the Indian Army. It's been great listening to you today. So you spoke a lot about offensive warfare. And in cricket, for example, at times a batsman might go out with the mindset of being on the offensive and taking the bowling on. But at times he also realizes that the bowlers are on top of him and he has to take that step back and get on the defensive. If I may ask you, how would you and your unit react to such a situation when you were on the battlefield?
Yeah. That's a very good question, Christian. I think thank you for the question. I'm reminded of the battle that I was talking about, Nathula. And this thing happened, and I spoke about it briefly. But the initial advantage lay with the Chinese, and there were bullets flying. The people, what tends to happen is the kind of impact that it has on the defensive formation or the unit at that point of time. The Chinese had suddenly opened up. A lot of people who were exposed suddenly died. 30 people died in the space of 15 minutes. More people died, people left and right. And so it created a frenzy. It created a challenge, which suddenly for a leader was very difficult to to sort of face up to, what would he do? So people started, and I said briefly that, fear is not something unknown to people. Everybody sees, experiences, goes through that period of uncertainty where you're on the back foot. That's what you meant, right? So if the forces were on a back foot at that point of time, and they started, a few of them started running helter-skelter because they did not know how to respond. The fog of war is a scenario where there's a lot of bombardment, bullets flying across, bodies splitting, and limbs flying everywhere. It's very difficult to really keep your head in control. So that wouldn't happen in a sports scenario, but I'm just talking about the extreme. So when that happened, General Sagat, who was far behind at that point of time, because he was, being a general, he was leading from a vantage point. When the battle had started, he moved up, just behind the forward line of troops. When people started running helter-skelter, he actually, got them back into the battle. That's number one. The message here is, you have a plan. He had a plan. He had belief in his plan. Yes, the initial advantage had been taken by the Chinese, but that plan needed to stay in place. You don't change your plan just because you've suffered a setback. You stick to your plan. And that's where I keep going back to preparation, training, having that plan in place and believing in what you have planned. So he made sure that everybody was there, not running away here and there, but give it back to the Chinese, because he had a plan. He had a plan of using the artillery, which he finally did. So there are two stages. One is you weather a storm. There's that sentence, there's that phrase, an expression. And there's a reason why you have that expression. You weather a storm. Once you weather a storm, it clears up. It makes space for you to launch into the plan that you have for your adversary. So that is one way to look at it. The other way is, if you have a plan B, use it. I would think, if you have thought through and if you have a plan in place and you are in control of that plan, I think that is what is important. Finding your center is important. Don't lose your center. If you lose your center, the enemy finds the center. If you play squash, anybody plays squash, you play the game of squash, you always try and stay at the center. And the opponent keeps running left and right. So it's important to have that center. And you've created a center for yourself when you've planned. Certain things may not go according to plan, but you don't move your center, because that plan remains. You have something, and he used the artillery. The artillery was, so to say, his Brahmastra. He wanted to use it. He wanted to use it when the time came. And all he needed to do, he knew it, was to weather the storm. As a leader or as somebody who's a coach or leading the team at that point of time, it's important that you communicate that, which he did by putting the troops back in the saddle. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.
That was a good one, Major. Who else? I think more and more, I think today has been so different, because we get into straight away cricket talks, and
Right.
through the cricket talks, you just get engaged about one particular scenario and getting into it. But this is where it actually gets more interesting. And I say that because when you're able to relate to some other people's role in different fields that they are in, and especially army, now when you're talking about, and when you're saying weather the storm, we might be sitting in the dugout thinking 4 or 5 wickets have fallen down, and what's the next thing to do? But to relate it to an actual fact of a battle which you guys go in, there is no comparison. For me, actually, that makes it my job more easy now when I think about it. What we are combating with the ball and a bat battle out there, I use a lot of times, I keep using one ball battles over here to explain the batter versus bowler challenge which they go in. But I think everyone who is here as an audience should take a lot of confidence, I would use that word over here, from the fact that what you are hearing and what you're listening from the people who are taking care of our borders and all those things, I mean, it's a deep story. I mean, deep subject, and it's sometimes, gives me a little bit of that, what do you call, adrenaline flowing in my hair, in my mind, in my body, thinking about what it must be all about, being in an army right there. But the message which we are constantly getting from you about planning, preparing, objective, which is so important, and with the opponent, which keeps changing within our field as well. This is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. I would encourage a coach to ask you a question, Major.
Sure.
If they are going to shy out, I will ask them myself. But I think we have a Dinesh Rao here. I mean, Rao sir can go ahead.
Sure.
Good evening, Major.
Good evening, Dinesh.
I would like to basically start with thanking you for you being there as a part of an Indian Army, and it is basically the Indian Army which is there at our service that we are able to sleep well and see the next day. So hats off to all the Indian Army people. Now, when I was listening, and my sincere apologies for joining late because I was tied up, but then I missed that initial part. So I could very closely relate to a lot of things what we say on a regular basis to all the boys who are there as a part of sports life. One is basically communication, because you mentioned about the Gorkhas who could basically raise their hand up because there was a clear communication. The other thing is objectives. Very clear objectives is what you are supposed to do, and what whenever you practice or whenever you are there on the warfield. So that was one good thing. Second thing is third thing is most of the things are explained through maps when you go to a battlefield, and going on the battlefield and actually adapting to the situations and understanding and coming into your role is something which is a great learning. The other thing again, I can keep on saying, the decision making is one particular thing which is one of the things where that relates to a lot of the young boys, if to take a decision when you're there on the field. So thanks a lot, and I could correlate with these sports which we are into and which we love and which we are very passionate about. So thanks a lot, Major. It was really good hearing to you.
Thank you. Dinesh, one thing I wanted to add, and related to the previous point that Prishit made as well, is that, there is something called as it's an army language. It's called the killing ground. No, killing ground is something where you draw your enemy into. When you do an ambush, you create a killing ground. You occupy the heights where you can actually bring fire down on the enemy. You occupy, there have been moments when all of us in the army, we've sat in our ambushes overnight, waiting for the enemy, creating that, that little space, or what we call as a killing ground. Killing ground is a term used to define that, your strengths, that you have occupied your areas of heights or areas of strength, and you have drawn the enemy into a place where you find it easy to really take him down. The reason why I say this is related to another phrase that we use in the army, is place and time of choosing to attack, and that's important. That place on time is so very important, that you don't bring down fire, you don't actually act on anything till that place and time of choosing is which you've agreed to in the plan is actually there. And that is something that relates to sports as well, that your tactics, what you want to do, which bowlers you want to bring in, what you want to engage in as far as the enemy is concerned. I hate to use the word, but killing ground is something that also is something that is very, very similar to kind of the tactics that you would use. Knowing that killing ground is very important, that this is what we want to do, this is the batsman, those are my spinners, and this guy doesn't play spin well, or that guy really loses his cool when he's sledged, or whatever it would be. The idea is, what are your killing grounds that you can draw the opponent into, which when you plan in the army, you look at that, and that involves the terrain, the time of choosing, etc.
Major, I think I'm going to take this word which you just spoke about, because in T20 we keep on breaking the phases into 4 phases, and I keep talking about
Right.
the last quarter specialist.
Right.
But I think the last quarter to win, we need to have that as our killing ground. So we have to make sure that our artilleries are set for that. So
Sure.
I'm going to use this word over here. That was a nice word.
Thank you.
Shankar, anything from you?
Well,
or anyone else?
So I have one. There's a conversation that I've had with Probal, which might be very useful for especially the coaches. We always agree that there is no turning back on the complexity that we have to deal with, whether it is a battlefield situation, whether it's corporate, or whether it's sports. I mean, you have so much information, Monty, at your disposal, given that there's so many analysts out there, just reeling off everything. So there's a lot of complexity that you can't escape. But at the same time, when it comes to execution, you have to keep it simple, because execution is dependent on very young cricketers, 20, 21 years old, and they may not have had the mental maturity to kind of manage that complexity. So, Probal has some interesting thoughts on this, because I think that's something that US is always deal. How do you manage complexities? You got your game plans covered. I mean, one thing is to say, have plan A, plan B, but the complexity that goes behind creating a plan A, plan B is immense. I understand that. But how do you balance that complexity with the execution simplicity that it demands? Is something that I would like Probal to talk about, which would be.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah. So to give an example, again, 71, and when you look at a plan, and a complex plan at that, it has to be in the drawing board, not on the field, is one big banner that we follow, that you can't make it complex while executing. Execution has to be simple, but it has to be it has to be a funnel where you've done all the thinking, you've done all the drawing board math, but the execution is a simple one-line instruction or order that this is what needs to be done. But you have arrived at it. You have not merely said it, but you have arrived at it after doing all the plans that you needed to. In 1971, when India and Pakistan were facing each other in East Pakistan, the Pakistani army had a river behind them. It was called the Meghna River. And the Meghna River, you couldn't see the other side of the bank. And the Pakistanis are facing the other side. The Indian army is going to come from there. Nobody can cross the Meghna. Who crosses Meghna? Some lunatic might cross Meghna. But the lunatic, the fanatic, the crazy man was there on India's side, was General Sagat Singh. So he thought what the Pakistanis would think, and he decided to outthink them. So that's where the complex thinking comes in. He decided that, look, what I need to do is I need to cross the Meghna. Simple thing. Now that needs a lot of complicated procedures. He went to the Air Force Group Captain Chandan Singh was there. He said, what do you have? He says, no, I have only these many helicopters, etc., etc. He says, okay, how many? Then they all both did the math. General Sagat asked him that, how many rounds will you do, and how much oil do you need? What is it that you need, and where do you want to get that from? And how many rounds, of ferrying troops from one side to the other side of Meghna would it need, and how many hours, and all of that. That needed complicated thinking in terms of, okay, this is what we have, this is what the choppers have, this is what the helicopters are, and these many men could only be transported, or these many round trips would need, it would be required to put the men on the other side. Now, when all that was worked out, The simple orders were, go ahead. So that was the execution. So when the men landed on the other side of the Meghna River, the Pakistanis were looking somewhere else. And so they were caught napping. The execution was go ahead, because the calculations were done on the board, and the calculations were, this is what we need. So Chandan Singh asked General Sagat, who was the boss of the whole thing, this is what I need. I can't do it. He says, okay, we'll get it done. You tell me what is needed, and then we'll figure out, and whatever was needed was done. However much fuel was required was ferried, was put there. The choppers, the helicopters were, and an entire brigade was taken across the river Meghna. It hadn't happened since the Second World War that an entire brigade was taken across that large river using helicopters, many rounds. But then, what tends to happen is, and again related to sports, it's the extraordinary possibility that lies in complex thinking and distilling that complex thinking into simple, executable objectives. It's that, and you have regular people having extraordinary thinking, and that's what results in extraordinary possibilities. If they were to do what the Pakistanis wanted them to do, they would have never crossed it. But it's when you think a little different, a little crazy, and then you have to do the complex thinking. But the execution, the orders, the instructions have to be very, very straightforward and direct.
That was a good one. Again, I think if there are players who are here, they need to understand when we talk about simplicity of execution, it also comes from the faith of those players who are willing to listen to the command given and they just don't question it. Because there is a lot of thinking which has happened in the background. And like you said, it's very complex when it comes down to thinking and analyzing certain things. And we see that a lot over here. I mean, I can talk about what I'm doing what we are doing in the team out here, because for the 2 test matches which we are supposed to play here, we are 1 month ahead, obviously because of this COVID planning as well. And then you need to have those extra players over here as well to prepare us in a proper way. But then when it comes down to hopefully then the results you see at the upfront later on, when the game unfolds, a lot of this planning and the preparation is in the background which has happened, and what you see is a simple execution in the front.
Thank you, Monty. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I can go on and we can probably, there are a few people who can keep talking about different subjects and for a longer period, but I'm sure not everyone will be over here into that same situation, and probably for yourself as well, the kind of time which you've given to us. Thanks a ton. I mean, like I said, I cannot do enough, the whole part of having a major over here who has served our country, and to speak to the audience out here. I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, privilege, and thank you, Monty. Thank you, Shankar, and Ashutosh for the support, and Dinesh. Thank you very much, all of you.
We are a small unit together with a lot of big dreams, and we keep ending with our every webinar by saying, "Live life, love life, sports life."
Live life, love life, sports life.
Right.
Thanks.
Great. I think it's a great initiative, and happy to have been here and really enjoyed the evening with you.
Thank you, Major.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Shankar.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Monty.